was dope.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17 young men. In time, his desires became more extreme, his deeds more grotesque. Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
And welcome to Rufus Villain True Crime Corner, Episode 3. What's up, Josh?
Yo, yo.
So tonight we're doing the Milwaukee Cannibal, the Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yes.
And this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. This was kind of like my idea for this entire show. This is like you said, this is like my baby.
Well, he's very famous.
Yeah, the big thing for like people of our age, like he's the number one like serial killer that would be in your mind.
Definitely, yes.
Because he was caught in 1991, and I would have been like maybe I was born in 82, so I was like 11,
right,
something like that. But my source material for tonight's episode was Jeffrey Dahmer, terrifying story of rape, murder, and cannibalism by Jack Rosewood. That's where I got most of my reading tonight. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this topic was that like he was the person, the monster that kind of opened my mind up to like, wow, people do this kind of stuff.
Yes,
You know, like that was pretty amazing to me. Like I remember watching his trial, and I remember very famously when he was on the stand and his victims' relatives got to talk to him. She's just, I hate you, Jeffrey. I hate you. Did you see that?
I don't think so.
It was this lady that was the sister of one of his victims. Before we go any further, we have to say tonight is a gold shield episode. You know, that anything tonight is definitely listener discretion advised.
Yes. No, seriously, guys. This is going to get really heavy really fast.
Really heavy real fast.
So, we love you and we want you to listen to every episode. But if you're a little faint of heart or squeamish, this might not be the one for you. I mean, I feel like Jeffrey Dahmer is famous enough where everybody kind of knows the broad strokes of what to expect here. So, like if you think it's not your thing, just, maybe tune in with us next time.
Yeah. Well, and then tonight's episode is going to be our very first two-parter episode. So, like, what was the one we're going to do after this? Butch Cassidy?
Yeah, Butch Cassidy.
That's going to be really awesome, dude.
Yeah.
But, like, just like Josh said, like, if this subject is not for you, we get that.
Yeah.
We get that. And, how did you phrase it before? We do not condone the actions. How did you phrase that? We were just fascinated.
We do not advocate or support the actions or views of the subjects contained herein. We just find them extremely fascinating.
Yeah. So let's just continue with the story of Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer.
Okay.
So I want to start off with one of his most famous quotes.
Okay.
Once it happened the first time, it was like I had control of my entire life from there on in. And that's one of the crazy things about him when he was arrested. He was really like forthright about like everything that he did.
Right.
Like he because he actually became what you would call a born again Christian. And, I actually read a thing. I forget the pastor's name. I'll cite that in episode 2 or part 2. That he actually came to him on a weekly basis and talked about. And he actually asked the pastor, "Is heaven for me too?" Right. Did you catch that in LP?
I didn't know. Like I said, I didn't really do as much research as you by any means, but I listened to a couple of last podcasts and the last episodes.
And that's
podcast on the left.
And that's a super, super great source material.
Yep, it's really
super
good.
Great.
Those
source
guys.
material.
Yep. And so I think wasn't it theorized that he was autistic?
It was, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And borderline personality disorder?
Oh, he absolutely had borderline personality disorder, and there was a big thing where he had a hernia surgery when he was, I forget the age.
He was really young, like 6 or something. How does that even happen?
Yeah, and all of his family said that like changed him. So that kind of like changes. And I don't know how like a hernia surgery would like kind of change your psychology, but like his mom stated like that she had a troubled pregnancy.
Well, it was 1966, so
yeah, and she had a lot of issues with the pregnancy itself, and she suffered from a lot of postpartum depression, which Dahmer later stated that like his dad being a PhD and all that stuff, like he was left alone a lot.
Right. Well, and his mom was hypochondriac too, right?
Big time, like any little thing. But he was born May 21st, 1960 to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. And what you were stating earlier was 66 was when his brother was born. That was Dave.
Right. I think he had the hernia surgery when he was 6 too.
Yeah, exactly. It was the same year.
Right.
It was the same year. So one of the big things I want to cite is like anybody that of our age, anybody over 30, would know Dahmer's name, and kind of put him on the top of the echelon of any real serial killer, due to his crimes and how horrific they were.
Right.
Like, because there was not, other than Ed Gein, there was nothing really like that before that.
Yes.
And one of the big things about him is he stated that he didn't have a bad childhood, which would have been like very indicative in anybody that like actually committed crimes like him. Like, to quote Dahmer, "So my childhood didn't have any huge tragedies or anything like that."
Right. He was, from what I saw, he was pretty much just like a latchkey kid, basically.
It's 100%
alone all the time. I guess his house was kind of like up on a big hill, like away from the town.
Yep.
And
Ames, Wisconsin.
Yeah, it was really steep. So, he didn't really ride a bike or a skateboard or anything down it because it was too dangerous. So,
well, and he didn't really have a lot of interests other than like his dad was really into biology, or not biology, but chemistry, which was his dad at that time was working and getting his PhD, which the family was actually struggling a lot because like his mom didn't really do a lot of stuff because of her postpartum, and then his dad was in college a lot trying to get his PhD.
He had to wear casts on his legs for a while too, right?
He did. I'm glad you found that, dude. Oh my goodness. So, but shortly after that, his dad actually got in 1962, which Dahmer would have been 2 years old. He got offered a job at the Iowa State University to actually start working towards his PhD, which at that point would be a huge jump for the family.
Right.
Because they prior to that, they actually moved around a lot. So at 2 years old, for his dad to actually like get a stable job in Iowa, get his PhD, and like actually start working towards actually making money.
Right.
So like there was a lot of like there's not a lot of stability in the Dahmer family. That's kind of one of the big things I wanted to touch on is like he didn't have like he wasn't abused. He didn't have, he wasn't beaten, but he didn't have a lot of structure.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why his dad was such a workaholic, was just because of financial stress,
And Lionel never gave up on him. Like throughout the entire thing, never gave up on him.
Yeah.
So, but in 1966, they moved to Doyle's, Iowa, to where he actually earned his PhD. And in that same year, his brother David was born. Right. And that's when his mother and father really started fighting.
Right.
And they actually ended up moving into 2 separate rooms in the house.
And they, once David was born, they paid less attention to Jeff, right?
Absolutely. And one of the really interesting things is nobody actually knows. Well, I'm sure there's people that know, like where David is now. He changed his name. No affiliation with the family anymore.
Right. I don't blame him.
Well, dude, if your brother turned out to be the Milwaukee Cannibal,
right? Like
I'd probably like change my name and go do something else too.
Oh yeah.
So like right around that time is where Jeffrey started bringing home like dead animals that were already dead, and like he quote wanted to see how they worked on the inside. Mm-hmm. So he started dissecting them, and one of the things I wrote down, like verbatim, what I wrote down was. Actually, the quote from him is I wanted to see how they worked on the inside. I said that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But and the big thing is like a lot of parents would have been like super alarmed by this.
Right.
But Lionel was like, okay, I'm a scientist. I see this as my son having an interest in biology.
Right. And so I guess they had like a chicken for dinner, and they had the bones, and he asked him what would happen if they bleached the bones.
Yep. He actually taught him safely how to bleach bones, which ironically in the future was a technique his son would later use. So that's pretty freaky right there. But at that point, I want to get into the McDonald triad.
Okay.
So the McDonald triad was created or named after J.M. McDonald. I'm super happy. I don't even have to look at my notes for this. His name was J.M. McDonald. He identified the 3 specific traits that 99% of serial killers share. It's bedwetting, fire starting, and cruelty to animals.
Right.
You know, with Jeff dissecting animals, he didn't 100% fit the cruelty to animals.
Right.
The thing is like he would bring them home and dissect them. He just never actually killed them. It's not per se like killing the neighbor's cat and tearing it apart.
Right.
He would just find the neighbor's cat after it died and tear it apart.
Well, and that I think kind of plays back to the fact that he was a product killer, right? Even later on,
he absolutely was a product killer.
He sort of had those proclivities when he was younger too, like with a little bit later in high school with the fetal pig, right?
Do at this point we would behoove to say the 3 types of killers,
right? Yeah, of course.
That I'm following you, brother. There's the Messiah killer, which is a killer that is in their mind they're doing this for a reason. There's the process killer, which is somebody that does this because they enjoy the process,
right?
And then there's somebody like Jeffrey that is the product. He never actually really enjoyed the I'm wrong. He enjoyed the killing, but why he killed was what he got after the fact, like what he got to actually have after the fact.
Yes.
So I definitely wanted to go through McDonald's triad, because if we didn't state that talking about Jeffrey, we wouldn't be like straight on point.
Right.
And from that point, we're going to move on to his teenage years, entering puberty, to where he started to realize he was homosexual.
Yeah.
And that changed a lot for him, because in his family, that was not okay.
Right.
That was not okay. So one of the big things I wanted to cite was him starting to have fantasies about sex and stuff like that, and then noticing a jogger.
This was so when he was 13 or 14 was when he started drinking at high school, right?
You're right 100% right. Yeah, he used to bring like full pints of liquor to school.
Yeah.
And he would on a regular basis, he would actually have full pints of liquor at school. He'd be drinking all the time. He would even drink in the middle of class.
He had a flask in his jacket, right?
Yeah, an army jacket.
Yeah.
An army jacket, which is it's funny like reading that. I actually pictured him wearing like because I have an army jacket, and like I like pictured that.
Yeah.
And like even one of his friends, like they never really gave him a hard time about it. But they asked him like, "Why do you drink so much?" And his response was like, "It's my medicine."
And I mean, he wasn't necessarily like discreet about it either. Like,
Not even close.
One time he had like a styrofoam cup full of scotch.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that today in 2019, like sitting in class with a cup of scotch?
Well, he seemed to be like sort of the weird class clown type of guy that did like sort of strange, funny things for acceptance.
Yeah. Well, like they even pranks. They even called him pulling a Dahmer.
Yeah.
And he actually called in a prank to the Secretary of State when they were on a field trip.
Nice.
And he got in trouble for that. But it was just like a slap on the wrist. But he was just drunk and like it was a bomb threat, is what it was.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That would not fly today,
dude. You get some jail time even as a 14-year-old doing that at this point.
Yeah. Well, how old was he when he started watching The Jogger?
What I wrote down was 15.
Well, and so prior to that, though, he had taken home the fetal pig, right? So
yeah, and he kept that.
It was the biology class project dissection, right?
Yeah, that's where he really got his interest in like the way the inside of the body works. And I really think in the long run, that is kind of like at its core of like maybe like the little spark of his psychosis of like why. Because like you or me, if we were to do something like that, like I know very well that like if I was to see somebody in front of me in that condition, I'd probably throw up.
Yeah.
And not to be a shock jock, but I probably would.
Right.
And like it's just maybe to me that's in his mind that's where he kind of made the dissociation.
Well, I think, it was, in my amateur opinion, like it was just a very developmental time for him sexually.
Absolutely.
And so, like, those violent images of, roadkill and dissected fetal pigs and what have you just sort of got fused into his sexual map,
Yeah, and when you see that a lot in psychology, like at that age, is where you really start to imprint sexuality into your everyday experiences.
Right.
So, but at that, like we were at that point, he was like starting to watch this jogger, and decided that he wanted to kidnap this guy. He wanted to kidnap him, and like his big thing, you hear it later in a lot of his interviews, is he wanted complete control. And I don't know if at that point that it was like in his mind, if like that's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
But like he never had the opportunity.
Right. Well, he actually had a pretty high IQ, right?
Oh, dude, he did really well in school.
Yeah.
He did really well in school. Like I actually read an account of like his teachers said that like he was super smart, but just never applied himself.
Yeah.
Like he was drinking heavily, but still made good grades.
Yeah.
He's still the entire like he was drinking all the time and still passing his classes. And with an absentee father and mother,
Right.
that says a lot.
Yeah.
That really says a lot that he was drinking at the level that he was.
Because he was basically just like a latchkey kid, right?
He was 100% a latchkey kid.
They sort of had like this secluded house, like up on the top of a hill.
Yeah,
so
that's what facilitated his first
he
murder.
was sort of socially isolated up there.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of crazy is like a kid today, given those circumstances, they wouldn't go very far, dude. They wouldn't go like given a kid today that was drinking like that at that age,
Right.
and left to their own devices to get through school. I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I would have been like, fuck that, I'm gonna hang out.
Yeah. When did he start weightlifting?
At the age of 13.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, like he was really big into I don't know what sparked that for him, dude, but he got big fast.
It's just his parents,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and he basically he was left at home all the time, and he just started fucking just benching, dude. I actually saw a photograph of his childhood home, his childhood bedroom that Lionel never actually moved around. Had a fucking weight bench in it. Like his room had a weight bench in it.
Oh man.
And that's just like what he would do.
Yeah.
He would just like hang out, fucking drink beers and bottles of scotch, and just fucking press the weights, dude. Just get swole, son.
Yeah.
but like so basically leaving him to his own devices, he just started drinking and lifting weights.
Yeah.
And thinking about his urges.
Right. So he saw this jogger going by every day, and eventually he like went down and like hid in a bush to watch him, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the things you stated to me in the research before it was he brought a bat, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. That wasn't in the book. That was
Well, I could be incorrect on that.
No, if LP said it, they're on point.
Yeah.
Those guys have a research team. It's you and me at this point.
Right.
But so from what I understand, like that not being able to follow through with that is where he got really kind of like frustrated.
Yeah.
And at that point, as actually at the age of 17, Lionel and Joyce actually got divorced.
Okay.
And his father moved out of the house, and his mom moved into a hotel.
Okay.
And he was left there.
Yeah.
And his mom took David with her, and he was just left there, expected to go to school, expected to take care of the house, expected to be an adult at 17 years old.
And that was like his senior year in high school?
Yeah. And he was still going to school this whole time.
Right.
He never fucked up in school.
Right. So
He never fucked up in school. So that's what's kind of amazing to me. Like somebody with this kind of like mental psychosis, an alcohol problem, having all of these like sexual problems in his mind, still was able to go to school and pass classes.
yeah.
Like he never had any issue with that.
Yeah.
So, but at the age of 17, he was at home, and he, as the story goes, he woke up and started drinking.
This was like spring 1978, right?
78, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he basically woke up, started drinking, didn't go to school that day, and he decided to get in his car because he ran out of booze.
Right.
And that's when he ran across Samuel Hicks.
So he had actually graduated high school at that point, right?
I could be wrong in my timeline. He probably might have been done with high
I think
school
it was about 3 weeks after his graduation.
Okay, yeah, you're probably right. Because I have all my research, I literally just like went through the book and just like started writing. So like, I'm glad you kept that on point. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is like he was like swerving all over the street, and like he saw Samuel like hitchhiking.
Stephen Hicks, yep.
Did I say Samuel? Stephen, yeah. So he saw Stephen like hitchhiking, and he was drawn to Stephen's chest because it was like hot outside, and Stephen wasn't wearing a shirt, and he was hitchhiking. And he was going to a rock concert, which I didn't see which like concert that he was going to.
Right.
But basically, like Dahmer pulled over and offered him a ride, and like Hicks was basically street smart, and so it's really weird that he got into the car with Dahmer.
Yeah.
It's just really weird that he got into the car with Dahmer.
Well, so I think originally it was just kind of like, hey, let me give you a ride down the road, and then eventually
let's go home and have some beers.
Yeah, and then he talked him into going and having beers and stuff. So
yeah, so long story short. Oh, and then Hicks was a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was no small joke either. He was no small guy.
Yep. So they go back to the house for beers.
They go to the house, and then basically Hicks. The way I have it written now is like Hicks got tired of his company and was like ready to leave, and Dahmer didn't want him to leave.
Yeah.
And they got into a scuffle, and Hicks, not being a small guy either, was able to push off Dahmer, and like in a fatal mistake turned his back to Dahmer.
Yeah.
And Dahmer hit him in the head with a 10-pound dumbbell.
He hit him twice, right?
Yeah, killing him.
Yep.
Just dropped him dead. And one of the things I read from actual Dahmer's like statements, he laid with him for more than an hour.
Oh.
And then had a sexual act with him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Like I said, we're not shock jocks. But at that point, actually, Dahmer realized that Lionel was actually due to make a visit to the house.
Oh, okay.
So he drug him into one of the house's bathrooms. There was 4 bathrooms in this house.
Yeah.
So he drug him into one of the bathrooms and like started cutting him apart with a butcher knife, and realized that he enjoyed the act. So started taking his time. And then he realized that he was running out of time, put the body in a crawl space in the house. And then Lionel showed up, and like he basically kind of like played it off like nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then Lionel kind of like told Jeffrey, like, you get your shit together. Because he noticed that there was like bottles all over the house, and like there was beer and booze, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna get my shit together. And then he actually paid for Dahmer to go to business school.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And after 3 months of business school, Dahmer's drinking made it just fall apart. It just fell apart. And at that point, he came home, and fucking Hicks' body was still on the floorboards.
Oh man.
Yeah. So at that point, he actually cut him up using the techniques that his dad showed him how to bleach the bones to make them easier to break apart. And then he actually dissolved the flesh in acid and flushed it down the toilet.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's rough, dude. But so he basically crushed the bones up and threw them into the woods.
Yeah.
And at that point, failing business school, not really having anything to do, not having any like direction, his dad like, you're going to the military. You're going into the army.
And also at this point, Lionel had remarried, right?
Yeah, I didn't get his wife's name. I didn't get
the second wife.
Yeah, I didn't get Jeffrey's stepmother's name. I didn't get it.
Yeah. She was pretty evil from what I read.
Yeah.
I think, I had that as, one of the reasons that he actually went into the army was to kind of get away from that situation.
Yeah, well, after Lionel trying to put him through school, and she was like, "Screw that, man! Like, send him to the army."
Yeah,
like,
I see.
Yeah, that's how you're gonna fix this kid. And he was they stationed him in Fort McClellan, which I didn't get where that was.
Maybe in Wisconsin or Ohio, wherever they were.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
And then after that, he was transferred to Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And then he finished his boot what do you call it?
Boot camp.
Boot camp.
Yep.
And he got stationed as a combat medic, and then sent to bomb hold Germany.
Yeah.
Which is like where a lot of other shit went down. Like being one of the things I kind of like have in my mind, being a combat medic, that kind of trained him about how the body works.
But he didn't he also have a problem with needles and blood? Like he couldn't
Yes,
take
which
blood?
is which is weird, is because when he actually got back to the States, he became a phlebotomist. You know, like, so that's what's fucking weird. And when he was a phlebotomist, he actually stole vials of blood and drank them. But one of the interesting things I found, and when he was in Baumhold, Germany, there was 5 murders that fit his MO that he didn't cop to later.
Right.
Which is kind of strange because in all of his like confessions later, he was super forthright. Like he's like, yeah, I did this.
Well, one of the ones in Germany was a girl, though, right?
It was, which doesn't fit his MO.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a girl, and one of them was actually a little boy, which still wouldn't fit his MO.
Right.
So, and what ended up ending his military career, he was accused of raping a guy inside of a tank. Did you hear that?
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, this guy basically stated that on more than one occasion, because he shared a bunk with Dahmer, unfortunate motherfucker.
Right.
Said that Dahmer used to fucking tie him to the bunk and just have his way. And then one time they were inside of an armored vehicle, which I just assumed would be a tank. He raped him and knocked him out with his in the future technique of using a cocktail of
I see.
pills and the whatnot.
Yeah, just sleeping pills, right?
Yeah, sleeping pills and booze.
Right.
So, but basically, he was actually honorably discharged.
Okay.
And they told him, "Is like, you can have a ticket to anywhere in the world, you can have a one-way ticket to anywhere in the world you want to go, but you got to go."
Yeah.
The U.S. military was like, "Dude, here's a ticket. Where do you want to go?"
And I think some of it was just excessive drinking too, right?
Well, it was a lot of it, dude. Very few of us have come across a drinker like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
Like somebody that could drink like that, just boozing it up, dude. But so he ended up deciding to go to Florida, and he got a job at a place called Sunshine Subs. And he did okay. Like the big thing with him, when he gets a job or it has something going on with him, at first it goes okay, but then his drinking just kills it. So he got fired for basically showing up drunk all the time, not showing up to shifts, showing up drunk.
He was living in a hotel at that point too,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And then after losing that job, he ended up living on the beach for about 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And he got tired of it and ended up calling his dad and was like, "Help me." And his dad, never giving up on Dahmer, was like, okay, you can come back here and you can live with me, but me and your stepmom got some rules.
Right.
So, and then at first he moved back and he followed the rules for a while, telling his dad that, okay, I'm going to go out and look for a job. He would leave every day, quote unquote, looking for a job. And his dad busted him drinking in a park. His dad basically busted him drinking in a park. Like, dude, he's like, "Jeffrey, if you can't do this, you can't stay with me. You can't, you got to get your drinking under control." So basically what he did is made him move in with his grandmother to start taking care of her, give him a sense of responsibility.
Okay.
Like, you got to take care of her. You got to take her to church. You got to clean the house for her. You gotta spend time with your mom. You gotta hang out. Your grandma. You gotta hang out with your grandma. You gotta be like her companion. So for a while that worked.
Well, that was in Wisconsin, right?
That was in Wisconsin.
So
Yeah.
where was he in Wisconsin?
That was Milwaukee.
Okay.
That was Milwaukee. Because that's most of his, like, one of the big phrases in the book that I read was like, they used it more than once. If you were a male in Wisconsin at night on the street and Jeffrey was around, you weren't safe. So basically he lived with his grandma for a while, and he did really well. He did really well at first. He was, other than getting busted not looking for a job.
Right.
So like one night he was like trying to more or less, like, he was like worked up. He was like worked up. Like, I've got these urges. I'm like worked up.
Well, so this was when he was working at the Blood and Plasma Center, right?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. So, because he lived with his grandmother for 2 years before getting a job at the Plasma Center.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, basically, he was doing that, telling everybody that he was out looking for a job.
So this was like 81, something like that. Right?
I would say it would be late 81. So, the thing that I was going to state is, he was out drinking drunk, and he found a storefront with a mannequin, and he broke the storefront and took the mannequin home.
Okay.
And that became a sexual object for him.
Right.
And that is actually really where this fantasy of a still mannequin-like partner came from.
Yep. Mannequins also have hairless chests.
Exactly. So like at that, that's about the time, because like eventually his grandmother found the mannequin and she made him get rid of it. And apparently he didn't protest. He didn't protest, but then he got the job at it was the Wisconsin Plasma Center.
Right.
And he did that for about 6 months, and then they actually eliminated his position.
Okay.
They actually eliminated the position of the phlebotomist at that point. So then he was without a job again. And like he's like, okay, what do I do? And then like the urges started to like come up again. He's like, well, after having the mannequin, he was like, well, how do I have something like this without killing somebody and going to jail? So then he started looking through the obituaries and is like, oh, I'm gonna go dig up a dead body. That way I don't actually have to kill somebody.
The old Ed Gein trick.
It was the old Ed Gein trick. But so like looking through the obituaries, he found the day of, he found an 18-year-old boy that died and was buried. He at midnight he snuck out of his grandmother's house with a shovel and a fucking bottle of liquor.
Oh man.
So like he went. I forget the name of the cemetery, but he walked into the cemetery and started digging, drinking liquor, and it turned out to be he was 24 years old at this point.
Okay.
So about sunrise, he'd only made it a couple feet, and he was like, "This isn't gonna work. Like I gotta go home. So he was like basically frustrated. Like he went home and was just like frustrated.
Right.
So at that point, like he had to basically go back to the drawing board. Also around that time, he was actually arrested at the Wisconsin State Fair for exposing himself, and that was the first of his actual arrest for a sexual offense.
He was super drunk there too.
Super drunk, and he had 2 arrests for sexual offense. And I noticed in my reading when he did something like that is when he was frustrated, like when he like didn't have an outlet.
Sure.
And what was the year that he took the job with the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory?
1985. He started working at the Ambrosia.
Yeah, and that was interestingly enough, that's where he held the job for like basically an entirety of the rest of the time that he was a free man.
Yep. The couple little facts I have about that was he was working there for $9 an hour, which is about $20 an hour now.
He was making bank,
which is pretty decent bank. He worked night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 nights a week, and he always had Saturday off.
Yeah, which was his free time.
Right, and that was his work schedule pretty much for the next several years, right?
Yeah, he got caught in 91. So, yeah.
The next 6 years, yep.
Yeah, so after that, he got arrested for a sexual offense by exposing himself to a bunch of kids at a riverbank.
That was 1986, right?
Yeah. That was his second sexual offense.
Well, and he had been on a really long cooling off period.
Exactly,
point, right?
9 years, which is unprecedented.
Yeah. So the thing that I have for that, he was really trying really hard to stay away from triggers, right? And so he was actually at a library, just minding his own business, reading a magazine, and like this random guy tossed a wad of paper at him and was basically like hitting on him through this wad of paper. And like he never responded to the guy, but it sort of like revamped his cravings.
It triggered him again.
Yeah,
it triggered him again. And you can imagine what it'd be like for somebody like Dahmer to try to put these things out of their mind, and then all of a sudden it's like what's that thing in the airport with the foot tapping in the stalls,
right?
You know what I mean? Like I don't want to get too much into that kind of stuff, but. Like for somebody like Dahmer, you got to be real careful.
Yeah, and so I feel like maybe that was sort of something that led him to the sexual misbehavior as far as exposing himself to kids and things like that.
Yeah, well, you look at it like somebody like him, like there was no real documented cases of that type of behavior in the past,
right? Well, yeah, and so there were actually that was the second time, right? And so the first time, after the first time, he was already a registered sex offender.
Yes,
right.
Yes,
and so then the second time, they sort of the prosecution wanted to increase the punishment, right?
Right.
But somehow they just wound up giving him 5 years probation.
Right.
Yeah.
And Dahmer was super talented about just talking his way out of shit. Like I remember in particular with that case of exposing himself to the kids. He told his family, he's like, "Oh, I was just urinating, and they misunderstood. They didn't know what they saw."
Right.
But he was Dahmer, and I'm not going to get into it, but he was being lewd.
Yes, he was.
He was being lewd.
Yes, he was.
So that's today. You're not going to get away with anything like
Hell
that.
no.
You're not going to get away with anything like that. But so you were saying that they gave him 5 years probation.
Yep.
And today it would be a completely different story.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to get into next is that same year. No, it was 3 months later. He met Steve Toomey.
Yep. And so, but at this time too, he had been going to local bathhouses and things like that too, right?
Yes. And when he got banned from a couple of them for drugging people,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually got known as the drugger,
Right.
Actually,
Well, yeah. And so they sort of had like a public area, right? And then they had like these private rooms that
exactly
you could go
that
to.
you could pay for,
Right.
Yeah. And like it was Club 206
Okay.
was the big one that like was his spot.
Yeah. And again, it was sort of like a pacifier for these
Get it out of
cravings
your
that
system.
he was
Yeah.
having, right? Yeah.
Well, and he started like making his what I'll refer to as his concoction.
Mm-hmm.
Like he would have sleeping pills mixed with liquor, and that like always worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he would go into bars and he would basically roofie guys,
Mm-hmm.
take them into these rooms and let them pass out, and then he would do his thing.
Right. Right.
And that's the excuse me. That's the only way that Dahmer could enjoy himself was if his partner was completely incapacitated.
Right. Yeah. He actually became annoyed that his partners were moving, and so that was why he started using the sleeping pills. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the crazy thing. Like there. I'm sure there's like in if you are a student of psychology, I'm sure there's something there for that.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure there's some kind of.
Well, I mean, I think it sort of leads back to his necrophilia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll get into in the second half of the cannibalism, and that's when the cannibalism started. But like his whole thing was dominance.
Yeah,
he wanted to have a completely 100% compliant partner.
his thing was control, just being in charge. Yep.
Yeah, and in the big thing is you have to think about like in development in the human mind. Like I said, the reason we do these episodes is the human mind.
Right.
Like where in his development did this spark? Like where did this why was it something in his mind that got to that point that made him become Jeffrey Dahmer?
Mm.
Like I said at the beginning of this episode, like anybody over 30, the name Jeffrey Dahmer sparks something in you.
Oh yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of my buddies and that we're doing this episode, and all I have to do is say the name Jeffrey Dahmer, and then we're doing a research episode. They're like, "Oh God."
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he holds a special. He's in the upper echelon of the world of the. Do you know who Albert Fish is?
Yeah. Well, because of you, yes, I know.
Yeah. So because of me, but like he's like right up there with that. You know what I mean? But like I think particularly what made Dahmer so prolific was the cannibalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in all of humanity, that is the biggest no-no.
Yep, that's one of the biggest taboos, I think.
And we'll get into it in part 2. But Dahmer did it to make them a part of him.
Mm-hmm.
He tried to he tried to preserve his victims.
Yes,
He tried to. That's why he did a lot of what he did.
right. So I'm sorry, you mentioned Tuomi, but I sidetracked you.
No. I'm glad you did, because I had something good to say there.
Mm.
But so Tommy, like he was at a gay bar, and I think it was Club 209.
219.
219.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got so many numbers written down here.
Mm.
But so they ended up hitting it off, and they decided to go to a hotel to not. Dahmer didn't want to take him back to his grandma's house.
Yes,
because he hadn't moved into apartment 213 yet, which we're going to talk about it extensively in the second episode.
That was pretty much his two choices, was like a hotel room or his grandma's basement.
Yes. So the two of them drank a lot, and Dahmer planned to drug him.
Mm.
And Dahmer drank so much that he passed out.
Oh, okay.
He drank so much that he himself passed out. He woke up next to Toomey in the morning, and Toomey had a crushed chest. His ribs were crushed.
So he woke up and the guy was dead.
Yeah, and an interview with Stone Phillips, no memory of doing it. No memory of doing it. So he panicked. Dahmer panicked, of course.
Yep.
Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So he actually put a do not disturb sign on the door and went and bought a huge piece of luggage to fit Toomey's body in. And he actually in the interview he was like, yeah, I figured I was going to have to dismember him, fit him in the body, fit him in the case or whatever. But it was early enough and big enough to where rigor mortis didn't set in, and he was able to actually fit him in the case. And so he checked out of the room, went down and actually hailed a cab. And the fucked up thing is the cab driver helped him fucking load the case.
Yeah.
Helped
The
him.
cab driver's like, "What do you got? A body in here?"
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
like, "Yeah, I do."
Yeah. So and then he caught a cab back to his grandma's house, took the case down to the basement, and started on the same process he used with Hicks. So he basically at that point started his altar, or more correctly saying like the idea for his altar.
Sure.
Which like he like wanted to start keeping stuff as a trophy.
Okay.
Not necessarily a trophy, but as a way to remind himself. And in episode 2, I'll get into more about like the altar itself.
Right.
But the big thing about this is where the spree started.
Right. Well, and so he kept these, like you said. I mean, a lot of people, use the word trophy, but for him, I think he sort of used it to like suppress his urges, right?
Absolutely.
So like if he has these things to sort of pacify him, then he doesn't have to go look for other avenues.
You are so on point with that, because I actually read a couple of like in the book I went through. There's a lot of like quotes for him. Like he would go back to his quote unquote trophies, be able to quote unquote satiate himself,
right,
and not go out and do it again,
right,
for at least a day or so. So, but long story short, yeah, he started bringing men back to his grandmother's house. Didn't fly with her. She was she like turned a blind eye to it a lot.
Yeah.
But after a while, she was like, Jeffrey, you got to move out. I remember one story. I forget the guy's name. This is actually one of his survivors. I forget the guy's name, but he brought him home to his grandmother's house and drugged him. His grandmother brought him downstairs, and it was long enough for him to wake up and be confused and come wandering downstairs. And Jeffrey's like, just go home. You had too much to drink. Just go home. Go home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and on that note, like he had plenty of, I shouldn't say plenty, but he had some partners that
they were consensual.
Yeah, they were consensual, and they just kind of like both went their own ways, and apparently, according to him, like they just weren't pretty enough for him. Like
exactly.
He was in search of a specific thing, and they didn't meet the criteria, so he didn't act on those urges because
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things we talked about earlier is he had a certain proclivity to certain parts of the body, like the chest, the forearms. I think, what do you call the muscle at the back of your leg?
The calf.
Yeah. If those weren't like perfect, he wouldn't follow through.
I see.
Yeah. So I read a lot of stories. I'm sure. I actually, I found a comic book that was written called Surviving Dahmer.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll get into that on episode 2. But it's basically this guy wrote a comic book that he did a bunch of interviews with guys that claimed to have been Dahmer's partners that didn't end up the way that most of the other ones did. So, but on that note, his grandmother got tired of him bringing men home to the house, and she kicked him out. And that's when he moved into the infamous apartment 213.
213.
That's right. It was not a good neighborhood. It was not a good neighborhood in Milwaukee at that time.
Yep. Very, very bad neighborhood from what I read.
Yeah, I don't remember I'll be able to cite this on the second episode of this series, the name of the apartment building.
Okay.
But he was on the second floor, and he had a one bedroom apartment that like actually saw the layout of the house or the apartment itself. There was one bedroom that had the only window in the entire apartment was in the bedroom.
Okay.
and that kind of comes into play later.
Okay.
But basically, there was a living room with an open kitchen. The bedroom, the living room and kitchen was basically one big room, and he had a big couch in the middle that he used to basically separate the kitchen from the living room.
Okay.
And there was one victim, that was one of his other surviving victims, that cited this huge fish tank that he had, and basically, like, on their date, quote unquote, the victim would feed the fish. The victim was like feeding the fish, and Jeffrey offered, like, basically he said he offered me an unopened beer and then a cocktail. So basically, Jeffrey would do this, be like, here's an unopened beer, but here's a drink that I spiked.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
so like it was kind of like a disarming technique.
Right.
Like, here's an unopened beer. I didn't, like, you know, and like your back of your mind, like, there's no way he could have messed with this.
Right.
Like, and who's to say that, like, maybe that didn't even come to their mind that, like, he was messing with their drink, but I think he used that psychologically, like, as a disarming thing. Like, here's an unopened beer, but, like, here's also a mixed drink.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually I read an account that he used to go to his bathroom, and because he had this bottle of sleeping pills, he had a cup that he kept his toothbrush in, and what he would do is put the pills on the sink, and take that cup and crush them with it,
Okay.
and then sprinkle it into the drink, and then like come walking out, like, his, like, he would literally like excuse himself to the bathroom to go put this together. So like, he was Dahmer was your quintessential predator, you know, and that's I think one of the things that makes him scary.
Yep. So I have September 1988 was when he moved out of Grandma's house until
Was that the year?
213.
Was that the year?
Yeah.
But you know, he that apartment is where 15 men lost their lives.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's a good place to stop.
Yes, I do.
So, on episode 2 of Jeffrey Dahmer, which will be next week. Thank you guys for listening to this.
Yes. Hopefully you're still with us. Thank you again
For this Gold Star episode.
for bearing with us.
Yep. And we really appreciate you guys. And Rufus the villain.
Hey,
Josh.
Hey, Keith.
What's that?
Why did Jeff move out of his grandma's house?
Why?
Because he needed more legroom.
Oh my God. Do you know why Jeff didn't eat clowns?
Why?
They tasted funny.
They do.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks. See you later.